Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian. China and the EU market has been advancing in recent years, with China becoming the largest trading partner of the European Union. The two sides have signed a comprehensive agreement on investment, or CAI, a wide-ranging deal to boost economic cooperation. But a recent decision made by the EU to impose sanctions on the Chinese officials over the Xinjiang issue has cast a shadow on bilateral trade. Earlier, I spoke to Joerg Wuttke, president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. He said despite lingering uncertainties, China is still an important market that few companies would walk away from. Let's take a listen. Global supply chains are going to change. Some argue much, some argue not much at all. What do you see from your business and also those of the European businesses that you're representing?
Well, supply chain was talked about at the beginning of last year, COVID and interruptions and so forth. But our members are absolutely in China for China. The surveys always indicate a lower single-digit figure of companies considering to move out. So when it comes to this kind of competitiveness of China, there's no question, and the growth model is anyhow pointing towards China. But now it gets very tricky on the PR side. That's something where companies all of a sudden have to do some soul searching how to deal with this in China as well as the rest of the world.
There are so many things that's going on as we speak. The sanctions toward one another. What does that mean for the European businesses?
Well, they put us between a rock and a hard place. And so it's very hard for us to either follow the mood on our headquarters and back home, or basically try to safeguard our entry into the Chinese market. No, it's terrible for business, terrible.
So that means you will have probably an ever more challenging time trying to make sure the business operations of the European countries in China sound and also on track. What are some of the biggest challenges for you right now?
Well, the biggest challenge definitely is to keep in touch with the home base, the constituency back home. And ours is very, very diversified. I mean, we have company headquarters, we have governments, we have NGOs, we have parliaments. I mean, it's a hell of a lot of stakeholders. And public opinion has not been really moving in the favorable direction of China. And here, of course, I have equally severe public opinion. So for me, it's really very hard to navigate something and still trying to be credible towards both stakeholders.
What about the rest of the world? When you are looking at the European businesses, it's not just to look at the China market, but also the international market from China. What about that part?
Well, take major textile companies that
it's
have...
It's different, one sector from another, isn't it?
Definitely. 10-20% of their sales is in China. 80 to 90% is outside China. So even China is the fastest growing market here. At the same time, these companies have a lot to lose. And it's also interesting, actually, most of these companies that have been mentioned over the last 2 or 3 weeks, they actually have no assets in China. They have nothing. They rent buildings, they hire people, and they produce here. So the whole sourcing model has to be reconsidered. Do I produce in China for China and outside China for the rest of the world? How do I do this?
How?
I wonder. I mean, there must be smarter people like myself. I'm working for a company that has assets on the ground. We really put steel and concrete there big time. So for us, there's no question of leaving, but for companies that basically own a warehouse here, that might be a very easy thing. Well, I think that we have reached the level where you possibly have to lean towards the side that gives you the least pain. So it's going to be very difficult. Business hates to be politicized.
Right. There are several things that we probably need to put into this discussion. First of all, about political system and different understandings of human rights. Secondly, geopolitics, probably related to the interpretation of human rights all of a sudden. And thirdly, we also need to see how the world's economy has been changing as a result of the market. So all of these put together, we have never seen that before, not even during the Cold War, it seems.
Business has to look into growth models. We owe this to our employees, we owe this to our shareholders. China stands for 30-35% of global growth in the next 10 years, and chemicals 60%. So, I mean, you can't really disengage here. At the same time, again, we are liable to legislation and capital markets back home. And that might lead to the fact that you have to make up your mind, do I stick with 5%, 10% of the market or not? And at the same time, for Chinese companies, it's equally challenging, because if they make a very public statement only sourced from Xinjiang, they might cut themselves off from global markets. So it bites both ways.
We used to believe that it's the global trade that brings all of us together, and the bond is going to be ever stronger. Are we seeing just a hiccup of this, or this is likely to be the very nature of a prolonged process? Your judgment.
I'm thinking about this a lot, I must say, and I must say I have no answer for it. Well, we have to deal with our stakeholders. I guess this is going to go on for a long, long time.
Are voices of the businesses being heard, really?
I think decreasingly so, honestly.
Why is that?
I think that business has taken a hit in the great financial crisis. Don't overestimate the influence of multinationals, not as big as people think it is.
And what about the small and medium-sized enterprises? I understand they're also a member of yours.
Well, we have 1,700 members in 9 cities, and of course they have the same challenges that we face.
Talking about China and Europe, the earlier agreement on the investment has been winning a lot of applause from both sides. I know you and your colleague here at the Chamber has been working very hard for it. You argued for the right way out every twist and turn. Now, where are we?
Well, we had 7 years of negotiations, and we had to defend it towards voices from the US. This is wait for Europeans and so forth. And we were really happy it came to a fruitful conclusion in December. Courtesy to Angela Merkel and the Chinese president, they both really carried it over the finishing line. It's a reasonable, it's a good agreement. And now, of course, because of the sanctions, the European Parliament, at least the big parties, made it very clear, unless the Chinese are lifting the sanctions on European parliamentarians, the European Parliament will not even look at it. So how to get out of this? And I can't see an easy exit ramp for both parties to actually go to the next level of cooperation.
To the Chinese, it's easy to understand the alliance relationship between many of the European countries and the United States. After all, it's been there for decades. However, it is equally difficult for the Chinese to understand how Europeans, particularly the politics, would not appreciate the rise of China and also the potential of partnership China and Europe together will be able to create. Why this is so difficult?
Well, I mean, 40 years ago, I told my mother that I'm going to study Chinese, and she dropped nearly mad. She thought I lost my mind. And then 20 years after, it became the growth story. Globalization was basically how to include China. So in a way, I must say that we have moved through a long period of time and engagement with China. China had an incredibly good standing. It was looked at very favorable in Europe for a long time. That actually has also a lot to do with that virtually every village has a Chinese restaurant. So China was always well perceived. Now, of course, if you have a very strong growing economy with a strong assertive policy voice, then it looks, of course, very different. And I think the crisis of the last years where Europeans were facing Brexit, where Europeans facing Donald Trump, where Europeans facing the great financial crisis, has also lowered our self-esteem, I guess, to some extent. And if you lower self-esteem, of course, you view others as a challenge. So my thing is not we cannot contain China. We should not try to even contain China. We have to fix ourselves first and foremost. China also has to accommodate. They're a huge state, huge civilization. So in a way, I think first and foremost, Europe has to grow on the challenge of China and not trying to fight it back.
To some of the Chinese, it seems that the Europeans are fighting a battle not for themselves, but for the Biden administration.
I would say just the agreement you mentioned in December, it was approved by 27 member states as well as the Commission on the basis that the Americans told them, don't do it or wait for us. They should have sent a message to Beijing. It's like, we can do our own stuff. We don't depend on Washington. They have to take Europe as it is alone. Yes, we are allies with the Americans, but we are not a poodle.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, during the two sessions, Joerg, said that now China can really look at the others in the eyes as equals. So how do you understand this overall picture behind everything we discussed today?
I guess it really is very important to see that also China has to realize there is no level playing field. China is much bigger. They have a much bigger economy. They are United Nations Security Council member. They are 1.4 billion people. I think that China actually does realize how big it is and how dominant it is in many ways. With this firepower, economic, people, innovation as well, China should not actually believe that people look down on it. It's absolutely not related to history, I would say.
So we are seeing something that we didn't see earlier, and therefore that's the argument. The previous so-called historical lessons should be learned, but to what extent and under what framework?
Well, if you look at Southeast Asia, if you look at Europe, we don't want to choose between China or the US and other places. But if the message is like, you know, there's always the US behind decision making, then of course you actually make that happen.
What about next, Joerg? For example, about technology, about innovation, even now about raw materials. Everything could be termed as national security in the US in this relation with China particularly. Now, are we going to see that danger also with the Europeans?
After all, 40% of all high-tech that enters China is coming from the European Union. We still have these particular SMEs, what we call the hidden champions. No, we are very good at this, and we intend to remain as good at this. And again, that's come back to my point, we have to do our homework. We cannot lament that China's rising. We benefit from China's rise, and of course we are competitors in third markets. But again, if you're a competitor, the thing you have to do is to fix yourself. So in a way, I guess that I like to see China actually being more innovative, be more open. We rely in many ways on better Chinese innovation. And we're still waiting for it. In many ways, China has great business models, but not great products. It would benefit us all if China comes up with this kind of innovation.
You've been working very hard with your colleague in China and many business leaders to make sure that business voice will be heard so that there will be better and more balanced decisions being made by politicians. What do you think that we most need in terms of the quality of leadership, not just about business, but also about, you know, our world in a very critical transition?
It's very difficult in the times of social media and internet to have a balanced, wise decision making. Something where I feel like the internet became an anger accelerator, really making it politically very difficult to change your mind. So frankly, it's very depressing actually to see that the avenue in order to have a better understanding is very, very small. I guess still we should not give up and actually should make an effort in order to show with more transparency and accountability what the other party is all about. It is going to be a challenge, but you know, it is also something where you can grow with, I think, if you stand up for understanding and peace.
Finally, before we go, you've been in China for a very long time. How many years?
I lived here more than 30 years, and I came here 40 years ago, first time. Right. I'm a fossil.
So, almost the very beginning of China's reform and opening up, you were there already. And you went through, together with China, some of the ups and downs during the process. What is your takeaway of the current situation?
I had the privilege of witnessing the largest economic comeback story in the world firsthand. And
you contributed to that too.
I was a small piece of that miracle in a way. At the same time, I must say that there is a stronger China. It's a more diverse, open-minded China in some areas. At the same time, I feel like there's less acceptance, understanding from people outside. Again, most countries, 199, are smaller than China. And I think China has to realize that actually these countries can contribute as well. So in a way, my anticipation that China will grow and will basically become a good responsible stakeholder never fades away.
Joerg Wuttke, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.